So welcome. I hope to be able to show you that this site, compared to some of the others, will show you what happens with maturity. Over the last 20 years now, we moved here in November of 2000. I went to Nova, Vermont in the next February, heard Bill McKentley started crazily planting things because he would say, this grows up in Potsdam, New York, these will grow here. And by and large, everything I started from him has lived at least one of any species. What I did initially was put in kind of micro experiments of any species that I thought could grow here. So I put in 3 butternuts, 3 black walnuts, 3 shagbark hickories, 3 plums, figuring if one died, I'd still have enough to pollinate. And most of those things have grown. As they did well, I would plant some more or try a different species. So each year for about the first 16 years that I was planting, I would plant somewhere between 10 and 20 plants, depending how long my back held out, because I did all the planting by hand. Moved into bushes and vine crops, put in stone fruit like peaches, which initially I thought wouldn't grow here. I also started getting into what one of my colleagues used to call garden porn, where I would see the pictures of pawpaws and I would read the descriptions of pawpaw fruit. And I figured I've got to plant some pawpaws, never having tasted them, just going by the description. So you will see some pawpaws on the trees. They have worked. I think they're delicious. They're probably my favorite fruit. I started planting persimmons. And I would say my first experience with persimmons and chestnuts, I would call them Lazarus trees, because they had, at least on this site, and with those initial sources, they would die back to the ground, and I'd think they were gone. And then I'd go out the next spring, and partway through, as I'd be mowing, I'd realize, oh my God, that's coming back. Sometimes it's just maybe that year, maybe that source, maybe that particular cultivar. I experimented initially with seedling trees. So the ones that I was saying I'd get a triplet, those were from St. Lawrence Nursery. He believes strongly in seedlings because then you don't have a graft that's vulnerable to winter kill. And even if the tree dies down, if the roots still had enough stored nutrients, they can survive and send up a new shoot, and several of those have lived. So after that, when I would get the production from those trees and realize, there's a lot of shell and not much nut, and realize, okay, it's a seedling. It wasn't selected for those things. It was from a productive mother tree, but the genetic variation in seedlings is going to be highly variable. Partly as we got warmer winters, so I was less afraid of grafts dying back. Then I started experimenting with some of the grafted trees, and most of them have done okay. I have certainly had some grafted varieties, both of persimmons and nut trees, die back and then get regeneration from the rootstock, so I will eventually be able to graft to them. We get lots of birds coming in. They actually are my biggest pest control, although they also can be a pest. I've sort of given up on Juneberries as a human crop because the birds love them and they will wipe them out when they're green. And I haven't really taken the time or capital costs to create a lot of structure around some of the trees they really like. I don't do any extra pest control other than sometimes hand removing webworm nests or visible Japanese beetles and things. I will not use herbicides or pesticides, so I don't apply them on any of these trees. Another principle that you'll see is kind of sustainability in a pretty broad sense. They have to be able to be living without pesticides, without herbicides, without a lot of heavy machinery. I don't want to have a lot of fossil fuel based equipment. I do have a 0 turn radius mower that is fossil fueled so far. I may eventually be able to convert that to an electric system, but they're really costly so far. We do power all our own electric from solar panels. We used to have horses up until 2 years ago. So with the help of NRCS, actually, we got funds for building a 2-chamber compost system, and we were composting the horse manure. And when I had planted these, and once a tree reaches bearing, I have used the composted horse manure. We're going to run out of that next year, so I have to figure out whether I'm going to start to get some off farm or try to create some more intensive compost of the vegetative material around that gets pruned off the trees. The other part of sustainable is that I'm now in my early 60s and I want to be able to do all the management for the plants, so I don't really want to put in another 1,000 trees, unless somebody else is going to be working them. So for now, I try to keep it everything that I can do myself. The nut trees, when they started, I was really excited because they taste so good, and I thought the people at the farmers market would be really into getting local sustainably grown nuts. And people don't have nutcrackers at home. They were intimidated. They really liked the nuts that I would crack out during the market demo part, but they didn't want to buy them and take them home and have to figure out how to smash them. Some of the people who had grown up in Vermont or rural areas where they remembered butternuts, smashing them with hammers for holidays at their grandparents' house often, they were willing to buy butternuts, and I can usually sell all of my butternuts to people without having to crack them open. But for anybody else, for a consumer-friendly product, I really started trying to figure out, okay, what happens if you crack them? But then you have to be able to separate the shell from the nut meat to be able to have a product that somebody's not going to break their tooth on when they're putting it into their nuts or muffins or breads or whatever. So then we came up with connecting with Jesse, who said, well, there's a way to do nut oil where you don't have to separate the shell completely from the nut meat.
There is a tree that has not been revered at all by nut culture, at least since colonialism, and that is the Bitternut Hickory or yellowbud hickory. This is an incredibly ubiquitous tree. It's the most common and widespread hickory tree in the US. It goes pretty much from the Rockies east. It can go as well north into Canada and down to northern Texas and northern Florida. Yellowbud hickory can thrive in heavy clay in northern Champlain region to sandy, acidic, kind of riparian, rocky areas along the Connecticut. Their average kernel to shell ratio is somewhere around 55% kernel to shell, whereas only cultivated pecans that have come out in the past decade or so are like even close. And the reason why that's significant is because when you are putting nuts through a screw expeller press or a commercial oil press, you don't want something that is pure fatty material, because that's difficult for physical reasons that I couldn't describe well, but it wouldn't extrude and flow through the system well. And you don't want something like a butternut or a black walnut, because there's, your cultivars are more in the range of 30-35% kernel to shell ratio, and it's really hard. And so the physics of the yellowbud hickory are such that when they are put through a hammer mill or crushed, they can go directly, without any shell separation step, directly into a cold expeller press that allows you to get a very bitter tannic press cake. So when the nuts are collected, husked, and dried, crushed, and then pressed, the oil tastes something like liquid pecan. It's really, really delicious. It has a very high smoke point, so this can be used for anything that you can use for olive oil and more.
And I guess what I was hoping you folks would take away from this is that if people are suggesting, hey, I want to grow X, and you may not have heard of it, or you may not know if it grows around here, or they may not know if it grows around here, that you could use this as a resource of saying, hey, I know it grows here. Do you want to try some, if they're cultivars that have worked here, depends what their soil is and everything. But to be able to be open-minded and say, when I started this, a lot of people didn't think some of these things could grow here. That amazing mulberry that you walked under, a lot of people are like, wow, I had no idea they would grow that big here. And they'll go and pull this up. It really is a mulberry. It's like, yeah, I told you it was mulberry. But if you can know that so many things, particularly if they're on a small scale where you get some individual attention, the first year that I plant these things, I generally hand water. The second year, if it's a real drought season, I will hand water things that look pretty heat stressed.
Yep.
But after that, they're on their own. They can grow and they can be productive.